Where does the conflict in Sudan stand after 8 months? The Rapid Support Forces says it's in control of the second largest city. But the fighting shows no sign of ending, and there's no political settlement on the horizon. So what does it mean for Sudan's future? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. It's been more than 8 months since the lives of millions of Sudanese were plunged into conflict and uncertainty. The RSF paramilitary group, or Rapid Support Forces, has gained momentum in recent weeks, consolidating its grip on the vast Darfur region and seizing new territory, including, in the last few days, the country's second largest city, Wad Madani. That's been a major aid hub for people displaced from their homes, and now the UN says at least 250,000 Sudanese are being forced to flee yet again. The regional body, IGAD, which has been trying to spearhead peace talks, said just last week that it had secured a commitment from the rival sides to implement a ceasefire and hold a dialogue. So how does this latest development in Wad Madani change the dynamics of the conflict? Where does it leave the prospect of a political settlement? We'll put these questions to our guests in just a moment, after this update from Victoria Gatenby.
Already displaced, up to 300,000 Sudanese are on the move again, this time from Jazeera state, a previously peaceful region south of Khartoum. Its capital, Wad Madani, had been a refuge for 500,000 people. But as the battle between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces extends south, Sudan's second largest city is no longer a safe haven.
Many of them came to that place with little but the clothes on their back. And, they've been struggling to survive even where they thought it was safe for the last 7-8 months. And now they have absolutely nothing. They're really broken. They need food, need shelter. Many of them need medical services. They need, most of all, though, a sense of safety, and they don't know what's happening.
Back in April, what began as a power struggle between military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his then deputy General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo erupted into a full-blown conflict. Since then, the UN says more than 12,000 people have been killed, more than 5 million have been forced to leave their homes, and half the population is in need of humanitarian aid. The warring parties have previously indicated they are ready to negotiate, but with the opening of a new front, hopes of a political settlement are fading.
It's a disaster, basically. It's actually a catastrophe what's happening right now. And the longer this war goes on, and the less chances any sign of ceasefire, is just will take place. And even though the IGAD statement was a positive uptick, as in, okay, there's a chance, it seems to have fallen on deaf ears when it comes to both the RSF and the army.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply concerned about the escalating violence and has reiterated calls for a ceasefire. There are growing concerns Sudan could break up if the conflict is not resolved soon. Victoria Gatenby for Inside Story.
Okay, let's bring in our guests. Hamid Khalafallah is a researcher and policy analyst specializing on Sudan's constitution building. You're joining us from an undisclosed location today. In Doha is Alan Boswell, the International Crisis Group's project director for the Horn of Africa. And in Washington, D.C., David Shinn is a former U.S. Deputy Chief of Mission in Sudan. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Hamid, I want to go to you first. How significant is the capture of Wad Madani by the RSF?
It's very significant indeed. Mainly the RSF were advancing in Khartoum and in the Darfur region, and both had strategic kind of purposes. Khartoum, obviously the capital, where the army is based or has been based before they tried to relocate to Port Sudan after most of the capital was captured by the Rapid Support Forces. And Darfur is their traditional base where they, get sources, could get resources in terms of fighters and so on, but also get supplies through the borders with Chad and DRC. So that, in so many ways made sense. But now the advancement towards Madani, particularly, that was, a safe haven for IDPs from Khartoum, particularly, and so on, kind of shows that they're trying to advance towards the entire country and to capture the entire country. So it shows that the significance the significance of the advancements stems from them going and conquering new grounds, and it's kind of changing the dynamics. I think for the past 8 months and so on, we were arguing and discussing who has the upper hand, the military or the paramilitary rapid support forces. And there goes the answer now, with the rapid support forces advancing into new ground. Madani is the 5th military base that falls and gets captured by the rapid support forces. And it kind of shows how the dynamics are changing in favor of the rapid support forces.
Well, Hamid, you're right. I can't count the number of times since the beginning of this war in the last 8 months that I've asked who's winning the war, who's losing, who has more control, etc. I don't know if this is a turning point, but certainly it warrants asking this question again. Alan, is the Sudanese military losing this war in light of the fact that they no longer control most of the capital? They no longer have the country's second largest city. They've lost most, if not all, of Darfur. Are they losing?
Yes, the army is losing the war. To be honest, the army has probably been losing the war for a while. They essentially have not won a major battle yet in this war. I think the significance of this latest offensive and capture, and before they captured it, this was also just the first major offensive that the RSF had made east. And so there was this question for a while, would the RSF essentially settle for a bit, consolidating the western part of Sudan, Khartoum, or would it push east and continue expanding this war into the rest of Sudan? And they answered that question the last week. And then the second shock for many Sudanese was how quickly they captured Wad Madani. The army essentially didn't put up much of a fight and retreated very quickly. And it has many Sudanese who thought that this might be a divided Sudan for a while now, thinking very much about what end games of the war might look like.
Yeah, well, the question of a divided Sudan is definitely one we're going to be asking today. I want to bring in David Shinn into this conversation. David, you're a former U.S. diplomat, deputy chief of mission in Sudan. When you look at this, the totality of it, 8 months of war, little progress with political negotiations, and now this, the second largest city falling to the RSF, you think what?
Well, I don't see very many grounds for any kind of progress on the negotiation front. I think that at this point, the rapid support forces probably believe that they have the upper hand and can continue to have victories. So even though there has been periodic discussion of reviving talks in Jeddah, I don't expect much to come from that or any other possible talks for that matter.
But what happened? Because I think it was 8-9 days ago now, one of the regional bloc, IGAD, that is handling one of the strands of negotiations here, seemed to have, I mean, I wouldn't say a breakthrough, but they were putting forward what looked like progress. They said, look, we've had both sides. The general who leads the Sudanese armed forces, General al-Burhan, and then they had Mr. Dagalo on the phone, who leads the RSF. And both sides agreed notionally, nominally, with the idea of a ceasefire. And now 8 days later, it doesn't look like a ceasefire is on the table at all.
Well, I think part of the problem is people are putting too much trust in what they're hearing from both sides. I haven't seen much reason to believe anything that has come from either side since this conflict began. And I think this was another instance of both sides saying what the IGAD folks wanted to hear, but they probably had no intention of following through on it.
Hamid, your thoughts on the various diplomatic efforts that we've seen? Two main strands to it, avenues to it. One is IGAD, the regional bloc of Eastern African leaders, and the other is what we call the Jeddah talks, right? So IGAD is involved there as well, but it's hosted by Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is involved as well, and there are indirect talks there between the army and the RSF. So two parallel attempts at bringing a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Have they achieved anything?
And before I speak to that, I would also like to add to the IGAD breakthrough, if we may call it that, when they had an agreement from both General Committee and General Burhan to come to face-to-face talks. And very quickly, we had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is captured by the Islamists, as we know, making a statement suggesting that this is not going to happen, and they denounced that Burhan is not going to meet with General Committee, which shows that, you know, when we're speaking with Burhan, we're not speaking to the right people who are calling the shots within the army, particularly when it comes to foreign relations and to mediation and so on and so forth. Now, when you speak about the different mediation platforms, the IGAD or the US-Saudi platform, the Jeddah facilitated, the US-Saudi facilitated platform in Jeddah, I think one of the main flaws is that both platforms do not bring on board the right people. Without the UAE, it's very important. It's very difficult to put an end to this war. The UAE support to the Rapid Support Forces continues. As we know, it's not a secret anymore. There have been various confirmed reports about the continuous supplies that are going there. So without the main people who are backing both military factions, SAF and the RSF, these talks are going nowhere. Another big flaw that both also mediation initiatives have kind of overlooked is centering civilians at these talks, and to avoid having a military-to-military agreement that will only consolidate, you know, the military capture of Sudan, whether it's RSF or SAF, and would kind of impede any attempts towards a more civilian-led kind of agreement that people were hoping for, which would not put an end to the war if you have just another consolidated military capture of the country.
I was going to ask about the civilian voice a little later, but since you bring it up, we might as well broach this now. Alan, are the civilians anywhere to be seen or heard in this conflict? Does their voice count for anything in what we've seen the last 8 months?
Well, those are slightly two different questions. They are to be seen and heard. In fact, they had a big meeting in Nairobi this week. Many of them, of course, not all of them. There are many civilians. It's very difficult to, of course, get them all united, but there is a sort of core group that has been formed that met in Addis Ababa in October, and they're meeting in Nairobi now. It includes a number of former members of the Hamdok government, the last civilian government in Sudan, including Hamdok himself, and others. I think the core challenge is less about that. Yes, it is hard to get them all united, but really the core challenge is how do you end this war and create space for civilians to honestly matter again in the political dispensation of Sudan? There can be a lot of effort made by civilians and their backers to get them organized, but unless someone finds a way of actually ending this war and halting Sudan's collapse, how that actually intersects with Sudan's politics moving forward, looks very difficult to tell.
Right. So ending this war, that doesn't seem to be happening. What do you think is the next move for the RSF, buoyed as they are by the capture of Wad Madani in the last few days?
It's obvious that the RSF is going to keep pushing its military momentum, I think, until and if it finds resistance. It has thought that it has held the upper hand since the beginning of this war. But essentially, it's been unable to get the Sudanese army to sue for peace at all. The Sudanese army has its main position at negotiating talks has been that the RSF essentially withdraw from Khartoum, which is a very popular demand, but is one that the RSF isn't really considering doing. So I think for now, they're going to push south, the RSF, it looks like, and probably push towards the South Sudan border, towards the Ethiopian border. That would still leave the northern part of the country and the eastern part of the country still in the stronghold, still under the control of the army. And these are its main strongholds in a way. And that could open up then another standoff where potentially maybe there's an opportunity for a serious regional push to try to stop this war from going to the very brink and becoming an all-out a battle at the end, but diplomacy would have to rally because thus far we haven't seen that sort of collective approach yet.
David, an operational military question, if you don't mind. Why is the RSF winning despite the fact that they do not have air superiority? Because there is one side that has warplanes and one side that doesn't. And the side that has the warplanes is the one of the armed forces. And that usually is the side that has the upper hand.
Well, I think in the case of the RSF, if you look at Darfur, for example, they have a lot of local support there that I'm not convinced the Sudan Armed Forces has in equal amounts. So I think Darfur may be something of a special situation where they just are inherently stronger. Wad Madani is a different situation, and frankly, I'm a little surprised that the RSF has been able to move into Wad Madani as easily as they have. It strikes me perhaps as being more of a weakness of the Sudan Armed Forces than of the strength of the Rapid Support Forces. Now, the RSF does have plenty of on-the-ground assistance in terms of equipment coming from the UAE, and that apparently has not been a problem for it. But it is a little bit puzzling that they have moved into Wad Madani as easily as they have.
Hamid, how have the Sudanese reacted to the fall of Wad Madani, the fall to the RSF?
I think people were really shocked. They did not expect the military to kind of just give in and retreat without putting up a fight. I think a lot of people that, traditionally supported the military against the Rapid Support Forces for the past 8 months or so, kind of are now losing that faith in the military that they would be able to kind of, defeat the Rapid Support Forces at any point. But I think one important thing that people are now realizing is that the military has never, in this war particularly, but also throughout its history, put up a fight to protect civilians. They have been trying to protect their bases. They have been trying to protect their interests ever since the war started. But, in all states in Darfur region and in Khartoum and other regions and states where fighting has taken place since April 15th, the military did not try to protect civilians at any point. And I think that was a bit, for people in the center specifically, they did not see that as much because, we don't get as much news and reporting from Darfur for many, logistic and technical reasons. But now seeing this firsthand in Madani came as a shock. But I think for people who have been following this more closely, particularly what's happening in Darfur, the military never tried to protect civilians. But the shock in Madani kind of made people realize this and see what has been happening. A lot obviously are trying to kind of blame the military leadership and particularly Burhan for this. But I think it's more systematic and it's a problem within the military itself and not necessarily the current leadership's problem.
Alan, the RSF since the beginning of this conflict has been accused of rapes, looting, arbitrary killings, detention in the areas that they have conquered. What do we actually know? They deny this, by the way. They deny this. They say that if anybody within their forces is proven to have carried out any of those crimes, that they would be held accountable. What do we actually know about the RSF's actions in the territories that they control?
Well, in many cases, they've been quite horrific. There's been substantial investigations done, especially in the case of West Darfur, where it was very clear there were atrocities committed. Sometimes the RSF essentially says that they didn't have control over the forces that committed these atrocities. There's obviously a lot of obfuscation going on. Also in Khartoum, there's been widespread looting. Perhaps they'll try to deflect blame and say it wasn't them, it was other residents. It's very clear the pattern of behavior, and it's clear that looting was a means of sort of it recruiting and bringing in people to fight this war. One of the motivations has been essentially a transfer of wealth from Sudan's middle class and elite to RSF fighters.
Okay, let's address where this could go from here. David, when you look at plausible scenarios for the future of this conflict, what do you think they are? Realistically, what could happen here?
Well, one, in the first instance, and over the short term, I think you're going to have a continuing period of just chaos in Sudan, where no one is really in charge, and it's going to be very messy for several months to come. Looking a little further into the future, possibilities would be a division of the country, which would be inherently unstable and would not be lasting, but it might provide sort of temporary relief, possibly even a ceasefire for a period of time. Or you could have a military victory at this point, more likely by the RSF than by the Sudan Armed Forces. But that would also be, I think, unstable because of the way that the RSF has comported itself so far and has alienated so many Sudanese nationals by what it has done in areas that it has occupied. I just can't imagine that would be an inherently soluble kind of situation.
Hamid, David mentioned the possible division of the country, and I think it's something that you referred to at the very top of the show in your first answer. This is something that a lot of observers and I believe Sudanese now feel is a very real possibility, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we have been seeing, a lot of patterns that allude to that. So ever since the war started, the military obviously was has captured the state institutions, but we have seen the rapid support forces creating federal institutions from aid commission to distribute aid, even health facilities in different states where they have the control, and policing as well, trying to establish police forces in different places. Now in Madani, yesterday after they captured the city, they have asked the traditional leaders or the native leaders of Madani to form a government. That obviously did not happen yet, but we have seen them trying to do that. But they obviously know that they cannot govern the country themselves. They can try to rule it by force, but they know that they cannot govern it. And this is why, if ever the country, the entire country or parts and pockets of the country fall under the control of the rapid support forces, and they try to kind of go ahead and try to form governments and so on, that is not going to go through very easily without resistance internally. And it wouldn't be easy for them to get acceptance externally. So that would not, result in any stabilization. So it is a worry that people have been feeling. But I think now with the rapid support forces making advancements in various kind of parts of the country, it's clear that they're not settling for whatever they have captured so far. They want to get more, which is quite problematic.
Alan, I saw you nodding your head in agreement for most of that answer.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but this is a very, very dangerous moment for Sudan, a very uncertain moment. The Sudanese state is collapsing. The RSF might be on a conquering drive, but that doesn't mean a state is being formed in its wake. These are very uncertain times. It's unclear what exactly will be left of the Sudanese state and of Sudan when this is finished. We could see the RSF continue to have victories, but essentially have local conflicts erupt like wildfires around because there is not the legitimacy to rule. So I think on the one hand, you have this war between these two main belligerents, but then there's this question of what follows. Even if RSF continues to win, it has shown no capacity to govern. It doesn't have legitimacy to. It's becoming increasingly a hodgepodge of local warlords in militias, almost like a perpetual motion machine, which just has to keep moving, keep conquering. What happens to it once this war finishes? It looks like a very bleak picture.
David, is there any way, I mean, it is a very bleak picture, what I'm hearing from both Hamid and Alan, and prior to that by yourself, David. Is there anything that can prevent this scenario from unfolding?
Well, if you had an epiphany take place at the leadership level of the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudan Armed Forces, possibly you could come to at least a ceasefire and some kind of ending of the conflict. That would not solve Sudan's problem, but it might stop the fighting. Short of that, no, I don't see any solution here. My analysis would be at least as bleak as those that we have already heard. And I think this poses a huge problem for the international community also, which is going to be somewhat divided on its response. But certainly Western countries are not going to be anxious to support almost anything I can conceive of that will likely take place in Sudan in the coming months.
Well, since none of you expect to see an epiphany, really, on the side of the RSF or the Sudanese armed forces, could there be a more robust diplomatic effort than what we've seen over the last 8 months, whether it's from Saudi Arabia, from the US, from Egypt, from the East African leaders? Could there be something more?
There could be a more robust effort, yes. Whether it would do any good or not is quite another matter. I'm just not convinced that either the Rapid Support Forces or the Sudan Armed Forces have any interest in hearing anything about mediation or peace talks from anyone at this point, based on any kind of leverage. I just don't see that leverage being there to force them to do what they need to do to support their own people.
Hamid, we have just about a minute left on the show. I'm wondering, just before we go, if you can sort of bring us the conversations that the Sudanese people are having when they follow, obviously, the trajectory of their country and where things are right now.
It's quite depressing. I think everyone is kind of losing hope now. And if anyone had, more hope that there would be a way out of this just before the fall of Madani, now these hopes are fading away. And I think it's particularly because, we have seen that the military is not able to kind of gain to have any wins militarily. And whatever political wins they've been having, they're losing now. And obviously, the Rapid Support Forces have been winning militarily, but losing politically. On the other hand, mediation has failed. Different mediation missions have failed, to bring both actors together or to make them commit to a ceasefire. So that is what people are worrying now, is that maybe there is no way out of this and this will continue. And I think what people have been calling for is that, at least what could happen now is for the international community to exert serious pressures for supporters of both factions, but specifically the Rapid Support Forces, the UAE, to back off. And then things might get to somewhere where we could see a way out of it. But as long as the support is coming in, there's no way to kind of make this war end.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank our guests, Hamid Khalafallah, Alan Boswell, and David Shinn. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.